Sun Tzu, history's first risk manager. For most people, Sun Tzu is just a name associated with battlefields, generals, and cliché motivational quotes shared on LinkedIn by entrepreneurs who haven't actually read his book. They treat him as a philosopher of victory, a mystical thinker who unlocked the psychology of conflict. CEOs and business gurus market him as their ultimate guide. But that version misses the point entirely, because when you strip away the myths, the slogans, and the modern marketing strategies, you discover something far more fascinating. Sun Tzu wasn't obsessed with winning battles. He was obsessed with avoiding them. He wasn't interested in glory, discipline, or domination. He was interested in one thing: cost. In a world that was bleeding itself dry through constant warfare, Sun Tzu became the first thinker in history to make one uncomfortable truth clear. The greatest danger to a state isn't the enemy army standing in front of you. It's the bill that comes after. War as a balance sheet. To understand Sun Tzu's financial genius, you have to look at the time he'd lived in and its brutal realities. China during the 6th and 5th centuries BCE, a chaotic era known as the Spring and Autumn and Warring States periods. The landscape was fractured into shattered kingdoms, each convinced it could unify the world, and each draining its treasury to the last cent to fund their wars. Warfare had shifted from the old days of aristocratic honourable chariot duels into massive infantry mobilisations, where millions of peasants were forced to fight. This required food, weapons and supply lines at a scale no previous generation had imagined. In other words, states weren't just fighting battles, they were conducting full-scale stress tests of their economies. The moment a king sent an army into the field, he was taking out a massive loan against his nation's future. Western audiences tend to imagine ancient warfare as heroic and legendary, but in reality it was logistical before it was anything else. The second an army crossed the border, the meter started running. Wagons, grain, horses, armourers, blacksmiths, cooks. Thousands of people had to be fed and paid. A campaign lasting just a few months could bankrupt a smaller state, while a year-long war could collapse the most powerful empires from within. This is the crisis Sun Tzu walked into, not as a philosopher sitting in an ivory tower, but as a risk manager forced to solve an economic crisis disguised as a military one. He looked at the numbers, the costs and the supply chains and realised that the way kings were fighting was completely unsustainable. It didn't matter how much territory a ruler conquered. If the treasury collapsed, the victory was worthless. That's why the very first line of his book, before he ever mentions tactics, terrain or deception, states, "War is of vital importance to the state." He doesn't call it glorious, honourable or sacred. He calls it vital, meaning dangerous, disruptive, and fully capable of destroying the very society it claims to defend. He spends the rest of the book explaining how to contain this threat and keep it as cheap as possible. Winning without burning capital. Read his most famous strategic principles through a financial lens, with the mindset of an investor. What did he say? The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. That isn't mysticism, that is pure cost avoidance. It's the ancient equivalent of getting the outcome you want without burning through your capital. When he warned that no nation has ever benefited from prolonged warfare, Sun Tzu was stating a literal mathematical truth. The longer a campaign drags on, the more it erodes the state's production capacity, empties the agricultural workforce, and triggers inflation that destroys the nation. This is exactly why he prioritizes speed, intelligence, deception, and psychological pressure. Why? Because these tools are infinitely cheaper than feeding a massive army. When you read The Art of War with this economic focus, it stops sounding like ancient poetry and starts looking like an Excel spreadsheet. Sun Tzu lists the 5 fundamental factors that determine victory: the moral law, heaven, earth, the commander, and method, discipline, which are actually categories of a risk assessment. His first question to leaders is simple: what is the financial cost, and do you have the reserves to sustain it? Even his approach to intelligence and spies is completely driven by a cost-benefit analysis. Today, governments debate massive surveillance budgets in terms of security or ethics. Sun Tzu framed it as pure efficiency. The money you pay to a single spy can prevent an entire army from marching in the wrong direction and getting wiped out. A single piece of accurate data can save a nation millions. Mismanaging information is simply a misallocation of capital. The same logic applies to speed. When he writes, "Speed is the essence of war," he isn't calling for blind aggression. He is talking about minimizing expenses. Every extra day an army spends in the field is money burned. A delayed victory is just a hidden bankruptcy. To Sun Tzu, maneuverability and flexibility are the ultimate forms of budget discipline. Unaffordable victories. Sun Tzu gave rulers a harsh accounting principle. If you treat war as a passion and a matter of pride rather than a financial liability, you will eventually default. History has proven Sun Tzu's economic prophecy right time and time again. Look at the biggest global conflicts of the last 2 centuries. The Soviet Union getting dragged down and trapped in Afghanistan, America's endless spending in Vietnam, or the great empires of World War I collapsing, not because their armies lacked courage, but because the economic model and cash flow behind them shattered. Sun Tzu would have recognized the pattern instantly. Prolonged warfare destroys a state faster than any enemy ever could. The irony is that the modern world's newest defense strategies still exist entirely inside Sun Tzu's balance sheet. Cyber warfare, global economic sanctions, proxy wars, and covert influence operations. What is their ultimate goal? To achieve maximum impact with minimal financial exposure without ever entering a direct, hot conflict. It is pure Sun Tzu risk management. His deepest insight was that the cost of conflict outlives the conflict itself. States do not fail because they lose battles. They fail because they drain the capital, social trust, and economic stability that keep them functioning. Once the treasury runs dry, a victory on the battlefield is nothing but an illusion. The best war is the one that doesn't force you to rebuild your entire economy when it's over. Power is not measured by how hard you can strike, but by how long you can afford to sustain the cost of striking. States driven by pride burn out early, and when financial systems collide, it is not the bravest or the largest nation that survives. It is the most economically disciplined. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And if you don't calculate that relationship correctly, the bill will be much higher than you think. If this video gave you a new perspective on the economics of war and the true power of money, don't forget to subscribe and like the video, because history always has an example to answer our questions. See you next time.